Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we will continue our team preview series with a look at the Los Angeles Chargers. Going through the AFC West right now. We've been going through all 8 divisions up until the lead up of week 1. So check those out if you haven't already. But without further ado, your 2020 Fantasy Football preview for the Los Angeles Chargers. Looks like it is going to be Tyrod, formerly known as Tyrod Taylor, under center to start the season, and maybe more. I mean, throughout this entire offseason, we've had Anthony Lynn and the front office alike just calling him more than the bridge quarterback. And it makes sense when you think about it because, you go back to Tyrod's last showing in Cleveland and that whole disaster. And that was them signing Tyrod, drafting Baker, same year. I mean, I know Hugh Jackson wasn't calling it a competition, and that's why, it took until week 3 or 4 for Baker to take over. But, I mean, Tyrod has been the incumbent guy in Los Angeles. I mean, he was the backup for Rivers last season. He played with Anthony Lynn back with the Bills, and it's just a situation where, he is going to be a guy to start the year. As long as he can play well, then, he should continue to get all the chances in the world. Money in history says Herbert's going to get his chance sooner rather than later. I mean, 17 out of 20 QBs drafted inside the top 10 since 2010 have started at least 10 games as a rookie. I mean, for every, I know Patrick Mahomes was in the top 10 pick, but for every situation like that where, the quarterback more or less gets a red shirt for his first year in the season, most of the time you see 4 or 5 other guys, get thrown out there as second things start to go south. So looking at those Tyrod Taylor Bills teams, now that we can assume that, okay, Tyrod should be under center for at least, the first month or 2 of the season. I mean, things to know, the Bills were a bottom 2 offense in pass attempts during all 3 seasons with Tyrod as a starter. Now, this didn't mean they were a bad offense. I mean, they were number 9, number 14, and then the wheels fell off a little bit, number 27 in yards per play during the 2015 through 2017 seasons. And, the big takeaway, just in terms of who was the most effective players in the offense, it was at running back. I mean, Mccoy was awesome in these years. PPR RB 19 in 2015. That was only because he played 12 games. He was the RB 4 and then the RB 7 in 2016 and 2017 with Tyrod under center. And that's kind of the big thing about having these dual threat quarterbacks. I went back in PFF's database, looked at 2010 through 2019. What have been the best offenses in yards before contact per rush, and the squads you see popping up were in 2019 we had 2 of them with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, and then Kyler Murray and the Cardinals. But the other 2 teams that were really ranked highly were the 2015 and 2016 Buffalo Bills with Tyrod Taylor. I mean, there really is something to, running all those read options, having the dual threat quarterback there, that can really do the design runs. And, it forces defensive ends not be able to close as quickly, puts, a different thought in the head of all linebackers. It causes a lot of problems. So while obviously Tyrod's not going to present the same advantages as Phillip Rivers did in the passing game, I think we're, letting the likelihood that this rushing game, kind of takes on a new level, go over our heads a little bit. So maybe Herbert gets in there sooner rather than later. I mean, the guy's not going to give you the same sort of rushing upside, even though he ran, sub 4.7 40-yard dash, and he's a big dude. I think he's just he's a little more, athletic than football athletic. I mean, we just didn't really see him take off all that much in college, aside from the 3 rushing touchdowns in the Rose Bowl against Wisconsin. So he's not a statue or anything like that, but he's just not Tyrod Taylor under center. I mean, few are as terms of a rushing talent. I mean, literally, among all QBs over the past 5 years, Tyrod has the highest rate of missed tackles forced per rushing attempt. So it's not like Tyrod, just running around like without any skill. Truly, he's not Lamar Jackson. He's probably not even Kyler, but top 5 rushing quarterback in the league, no doubt, whenever he's under center. So I do expect Tyrod to hold on to this job for at least the first couple months of the season, because you look at the schedule. They start with the Bengals, then we got the Chiefs, then we got the Panthers. So, assuming he can get past the Bengals and Panthers there, we're 2-1. And here's where the problem starts. This is the stretch Tyrod needs to get past. We got back-to-back road trips against the Buccaneers and then the Saints. Now, normally when I looked at this, I wanted to say that, okay, after those 5 games, it's probably when we get Herbert in there. That would then also allow him to hit that double-digit kind of threshold we've seen historically. But after that Saints game, we have a short week until the Chargers face the Jets. So assuming Tyrod can hold on to the job then, he gets the Jets, Dolphins, Jaguars, Raiders, before the bye week. So after that, it gets tough. Broncos, Bills, Patriots. But, man, those first 7-8 weeks of the season, certainly looking good for Tyrod. Personally, I've been really high on Joe Burrow throughout this offseason, but he has a pretty tough first month of the season. Same thing with Daniel Jones. I'm not quite as high on him, but if you have one of these quarterbacks in fantasy that you're concerned about their first couple matches of the year, don't be afraid to get Tyrod Taylor, and because he's available in the last round of drafts. And again, you're getting Bengals, Chiefs, Panthers. Those are three situations where he's going to be in the top 16 QBs in most projections. And that rushing floor is great, everyone. Week 1, cash game QB on DraftKings for sure. So that's the quarterback situation. Moving on to running back. It's the Austin Eckler show, and I understand people are concerned, like, okay, we don't have Phillip Rivers now to dink and dunk the ball to Eckler all game, and no, I don't think we're going to see 15 reception games from Eckler this year, but he's still the lead RB1. As much concern as we put into Rivers not being there for Eckler, I don't think we paid enough attention to Melvin freaking Gordon not being there. I mean, Eckler, when Gordon has not been there, has played at least 65 to 95% of the snaps on every single occasion. I mean, it's been 7 games where Eckler has just been the guy. And okay, he's not your, old school, hey, we're going to give this guy 15, 20 carries up the middle type of back, but the snaps are there and the usage is literally as a wide receiver 3 kind of RB1 hybrid. I mean, not many running backs line up in the slot or out wide. We hear every offseason, coaches talking about wanting to use more 2 RB formations and things like that, but Los Angeles with the Chargers is actually one of those few situations we should feel confident about their team actually doing that. I mean, last year, the top 3 running backs, the percentage of snaps spent in the slot or out wide, were number 1, Tariq Cohen at 39%, number 2, Kareem Hunt at 33%, and number 3, Austin Eckler at 26%. So I see people, projecting Justin Jackson and or Joshua Kelly to get a decent chunk of run, and because of that, I think they kind of unjustly slide Eckler down the ranks, but we could legit see a situation where Eckler gets 50% of the RB snaps, 25% of the wide receiver snaps, so we're looking at 75% for him. And then we have Jackson and or Kelly split and work on early downs, getting maybe double-digit rush attempts between them as well. So I think this rushing game is going to be really efficient. I mean, I was talking to some guys at Fade and Noise the other day, and one of the guys was actually predicting that Justin Jackson could also be a top 24 back alongside Eckler. I don't think we're going to see Jackson or Kelly really pull away enough from each other to get that many consistent carries, but this rushing offense is going to be really legit, and I think whoever is getting the rock will be efficient. It's going to be Eckler. I mean, they just gave him a 4-year, $24.5 million contract. I mean, the dude's been a stud. It's a situation where a really proven talented player is getting seemingly enhanced volume. I mean, this was the PPR RB2 in weeks 1 through 4 last season. So, and he was the RB5 in weeks 5 through 17. So we've seen Eckler do it with or without Melvin Gordon. Okay, again, the Rivers pass attempts don't help, but it's not like Eckler's all of a sudden going to catch 30 passes, and it's also a situation where we should expect his rushing efficiency to take a leap in addition to the volume. So I think Eckler needs to be continued to be treated as a top 10 fantasy back. Moving on to the wide receiver position. This is where it gets a little rough, everyone. I mean, Keenan Allen is so swaggy. I love his, long sleeve baggy look. He's made that cool over the years. His route running is amazing. I mean, he spent one of his early year careers with Stevie Johnson, and you just kind of see that style seep into his way running routes. I mean, any top 5 route runner list without Keenan Allen on it is wrong, but I just worry if we're going to see the same sort of fantasy success this season. I mean, he's evaporated the whole injury-prone narrative over the last few years, but he's just gotten fed the ball from Phillip Rivers. I mean, he has averaged 148 targets per year over the past 3 seasons, and Tyrod Taylor never fed a receiver 100-plus targets in his 3 years as the Bills' starting QB. I mean, those offenses ranked 31st, 32nd, and 31st in pass attempts. There were a couple years, I think Sammy Watkins finished with like 96 while missing a few games. I mean, it wouldn't be shocking if if Keenan can still clear triple-digit targets, maybe even flirt with 120 or so. But, unlike Eckler, where we have the corresponding rushing boost, we're not getting that with Keenan. We're going to see 20 or 30 fewer targets at a minimum from last year, and I would also predict the efficiency going from Rivers to Tyrod isn't going to be great. So And that's assuming that Keenan does still continue to be a number one guy. I do think he's talented enough to do so. And, this Mike Williams injury, and he's not going to be, could miss the first 4 or 6 weeks of the season, apparently, or even if it's 4 or 6 weeks from the injury that occurred, during training camp. We're still looking at Mike Williams maybe missing a game or two in September. Even with him out of the picture, we still have Eckler, we still have Hunter Henry, still have a bunch of talent in that passing game. That doesn't necessarily guarantee Keenan's going to be the guy. So, he is already being depressed enough in ADP to kind of warrant a selection in those later rounds. If you're loading up, not in later rounds, I mean, like 6 or 7. If you're loading up at the RBs early, but I just think the usual sky-high ceiling for Keenan isn't there, and unfortunately the floor isn't really looking good as well. So we'll see what works out there. Last year was so infuriating in Los Angeles because they had Andre Patton soaking up like 70% of the snaps per game. They just never even threw him the ball. I mean, just have Eckler stand there, and he's going to attract more attention from the defense and some of these wide receiver threes. Whether that ends up being KJ Hill or whoever this time around, we'll see. But I just don't think that anyone outside of Keenan Allen is going to be able to be even a viable fantasy producer this year. Mike Williams, if he can get healthy, maybe, but it's just going to kind of be what we've seen the last 2 years. More boom or bust, not so much because of his talent, but more so because of the role in this offense as the likely number 3, even maybe number 4 pass game option. I mean, I would love to see Mike Williams on a team where he gets a chance to be the true alpha wide receiver 1, but I don't think it's going to be this year. I'm not touching Mike Williams in anything other than best ball. I know that's, the token kind of thing to say with these wide receivers, better in best ball, but for Mike particularly this year, I think it's true. And, if you are going to play best ball, make sure you do it with the fine folks. Underdog Fantasy, use code PFF, you get free entry into the $1 million contest. I wouldn't advise having too high of exposure to Mike Williams, but hey, we talk about situations where you do want to be contrarian, and when you want to maybe do 0 RB drafts, and taking chances like a Mike Williams in the later rounds when a lot of people are going to be afraid of the injury risk and things like that could be a good way of separating yourself. So Underdog Fantasy, code PFF, go get them, people. Tight end position, Hunter Henry, just so good. I mean, he's averaged 8.95 yards per target since entering the league, and that's the 8th highest mark among 52 tight ends with at least 100 targets since 2016. And you look at those Bills offenses, I mean, Charles Clay had over 500 yards in each of his 3 seasons with Tyrod under center. And I mean, they had Sammy Watkins, Robert Woods in those offenses. There's a non-zero chance that Hunter Henry could kind of lead the way in this new offense. Heavy favorite, deserves to be Keenan Allen. I do think it will be Keenan Allen, but I mean, Hunter Henry is one of these tight ends in that 4 through 10 range where, okay, the ceiling actually could be as their offense's number 1 pass game target, and that should be worth something kind of in a tiebreaker. Ultimately, though, this is going to be a run-heavy approach, and okay, if Tyrod does, bow out sooner rather than later, the Herbert, now we have a rookie QB under center. So it's my usual tight end strategy throughout this offseason has been, try to get Kelsey, Kittle, or Andrews. If not, I'm going to wait, and then, attack the likes of Chris Herndon, Jonnu Smith, and those types of guys in the later rounds. So haven't been getting much Hunter Henry, but the guy's talented. There's a path to success. I just think there's too many questions working against him to really warrant reaching on him. But, if you're in a home league, 10-team league or something like that, and only 1 tight end, and it's round 13, 14, and Hunter Henry's there, could certainly do worse than having that stud as your tight end 1. Moving on to the ranks. At quarterback, I have Tyrod Taylor as my QB 28, 1 spot behind Darnold, 1 spot ahead of Derek Carr. This is where it's tough because, if I was projecting all these guys for 16 games, and Tyrod would be significantly higher, but because we're not. I mean, I don't think he's going to start 16 games this year. I think Herbert will come in eventually, probably closer to December than October, but I don't think Tyrod's going to start probably more than 12 games, and because of that I got to rank him lower. But again, I really think on teams with Burrow, Daniel Jones, pay attention to the September strength of schedule, not the whole season. We don't know what's going to change, what's going to happen, what injuries are going to happen, but just those first 4 games, and you can really tell some of these quarterbacks that are going to struggle. Tyrod has a good chance of opening up the season strong. Don't really think he'll keep the momentum, but it's as much as season-long fantasy, you want to look at the big picture. Playing week by week can also have its positives. So Justin Herbert, I have lower at QB 34. I don't think he's going to be a guy we're going to be looking to start in fantasy in 2020. At running back, I have Austin Eckler as my RB11, 1 spot behind Joe Mixon, 1 spot ahead of Miles Sanders. I pretty much have Eckler as I mean, the guys in front of him, Mixon, Chubb, Henry, Drake, Cook, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Kamara, Zeke, Barkley, McCaffrey. I mean, these are guys that are going to flirt with, 300 plus touches, have the talent to warrant it, and do big things with it. I have Eckler ahead of, Miles Sanders, Jacobs, Aaron Jones. So I truly think he's talented. There's a little bit of the workload concern. I mean, I just don't think the Chargers are going to give Eckler 250 plus rush attempts like these other guys. But with the pass game volume, I mean, guys, it's a cheat code in fantasy to have a running back that gets these receptions. I mean, imagine if every rush attempt got to start 10 yards downfield. That's the equivalent to, getting a full point per reception just anytime the guy can catch the ball. So I think over these backs that do have a little more workload concerns than, your top 10 guys, Eckler should be prioritized ahead of them. Moving on to wide receiver, Keenan Allen I have as my wide receiver 29, one spot behind AJ Green, one spot ahead of T.Y. Hilton. I have Julian Edelman behind Hilton. It's just kind of this veteran wide receiver one range that, okay, there's also a new quarterback under center. What should we expect? It could go well. These guys are talented. There's not a ton of guys in the depth chart. There's there's a reason why their ADP is this low. If we didn't have these kind of questions under center, all these guys would be probably top 16 players. I mean, I know AJ Green is more injury related than anything, but ceiling's there. And when he's being priced as the wide receiver 29, I don't mind taking a shot on him. Again, we hate ADPs. We don't hate players. So while I'm not reaching for Keenan Allen, at some point, all these guys become a value. And, if you can get them around that wide receiver 30 range, I mean, it's Keenan freaking Allen at some point. So definitely don't treat him, as the top 12, top 15 receiver we've seen in recent years. But, every man has their price. Mike Williams, I had to drop a bunch just because of this injury. I have him wide receiver 56, one spot behind Christian Kirk, one spot ahead of N'Keal Harry. And yeah, just in this offense, I think it's going to be very tough for Mike to get that consistent production in 2020. I have Hunter Henry as my tight end 8, one spot behind Gronk, one spot ahead of Darren Waller. Yeah, I'm just really not touching these tight ends as a whole. I mean, I could see a scenario where Henry gets 100 targets and has a really good season. I could also see a scenario where he gets 50, and this offense is number 4 pass game option. So just the floor of all these receiving options is so much lower. Henry is good enough to make the most out of it, but I think the same could be said for much cheaper tight ends in fantasy. So moving on to the win total, Chargers sitting at 7.5. And you look at the division, that's also where the Raiders are at. Chiefs are at 11.5. Man, I really want to kind of back the Chargers on this because this defense is nasty. You got a healthy Derwin James coming back. Chris Harris added to that secondary makes them arguably the best cornerback group in the league. We got Bosa and Ingram, assuming he doesn't decide to hold out after Bosa just got that deal on the D-line. I mean, just studs all over the place. Truly one of the more talented rosters in the league. And yes, the Chiefs are the studs, but it wouldn't be shocking at all if the Chargers get past the Broncos and the Raiders. All these teams are at 7.5. I would actually lean towards the over here, and there's a little bit of juice, minus 130 on the over. I feel like while Tyrod isn't this 12-4 quarterback or someone that's gonna be able to elevate a bunch of their teammates, we still have plenty of examples of him taking teams to that 500 mark, to the playoffs with a semi-decent supporting roster. And I think now he's playing with probably the best roster of his career. So I would, not put the mortgage on it, but say with a little bit of confidence, Chargers over 7.5 could be a decent bet, more because of the overall roster than specifically Tyrod under center. But hey, a win is a win is a win. So that's going to do it. Thank you all for listening. This has been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Ian Hartitz. Until the next one, take care, everybody.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.